Okay, and we are live.
Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to the February 3rd, 2025 meeting of the Finance. Well, 25 meeting of the Finance and Facilities Committee of the University of Rhode Island Board of Trustees. The meeting is being held in person with committee members participating remotely. At this time, Board Secretary Michelle Carreri will conduct a roll call attendance to determine if quorum is present. Please clearly respond present via WebEx or present in person where your name is called.
Vahid Onjazieri,
Present via WebEx.
Armin Sabatoni,
Present via WebEx.
Maria Ducharme. Maria, I think you're on mute.
Present via WebEx.
Michael Fascitelli, Joe Formicola,
Present via WebEx.
Courtney Nicolato,
Present via WebEx.
Christine Bovey,
Present via WebEx.
Mark Parlange.
I'm present via WebEx.
Thank you.
You don't sound so sure, Mark.
Monday morning.
We have a quorum, and so since the quorum is present, reminder to all the members for the benefit of our audience and the note takers, please clearly identify yourself whenever you comment, make a motion or a second to a motion. Participants using WebEx are required to keep their cameras on as remote members, and all persons present at the meeting location must be clearly audible and visible to each other. At this time, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional stomping grounds of the Narragansett Nation and Niantic people. Are there any proposed amendments to the published agenda? I would like to propose an amendment myself. Since there's no other ones, we'd like to move the discussion on tuition and fees to the front of the agenda so we have enough time to discuss it prior to executive session. And may I have a motion? I'm trying to follow my notes. Sorry, I'm doing like my Fascitelli thing. I'd like to get a motion. He's here. I was talking about you. I didn't think you were here. Sorry. May I have a motion to accept the proposed amendment?
This is Ahmed, so moved.
Second.
Joe, second.
All in favor, please say yes.
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 Okay, thank you. Can we move on to the meeting? First order of business, approval of the minutes. Minutes of October 21st, 2024, Finance and Facilities Committee meetings as per your enclosures. If there are no questions or discussions, are there any questions, discussions on that? May I have a motion that the committee approve the minutes of the October 21st, 2024 meeting?
So moved. Like Fascitelli. Second, Joe Formicola.
All in favor, please say yes.
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 Yes. Opposed? Motion passes. Now to discussion items. The first item, there's no action required in this part of discussion items. I'm going to be referring to Abby Benson, Vice President of Administration and Finance, for our discussion items. The first one to start with is review of the governor's recommended budget for FY26.
Great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning. I do think we have a few slides coming up, but the purpose of this item is just to give you an update on the governor's recommended budget, which came out a few weeks ago. As you know, we submit our request to the state in September, and then throughout the fall, we answer questions, and the governor's budget comes out with our recommendations. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. So this is a summary of the governor's budget request. And for context, I've also included the evolution of the FY25 budget request. As a reminder, the governor's budget is just one step in the process. So we now will start, we've already started conversations and we'll continue conversations with the General Assembly and won't have a final appropriation until closer to June or July. And the state budget request consists of three components. So if you see here, we have chosen to outline our operating budget shortfall in the recent years. And we also outline our current service level, which is essentially the dollars that are required to kind of keep the trains running at URI, so COLA, utilities, and contractual costs. And then we have a third bucket, which is requests for strategic initiatives. So If you look here, you can see the evolution of the FY25 request, what we got in the governor's budget and what we had in FY25 enacted. I'm not going to walk through those, but for the FY26 request, we did start in our budget with a $5.7 million budgeted operating shortfall. The FY26 governor's budget did not provide any funding to address that shortfall. For current service level, we asked for $21.6 million, and the governor's budget gave us $4.5 million. And then our request for strategic initiatives, we asked for $13.6 million, and we didn't receive any funding in the governor's budget. So overall, what the governor's recommending is a $4.5 million increase from the FY25 enacted level, which, if you can see in the upper right-hand corner, is $110.8 million. So if there are no questions, we can go to the next slide. So this is just a reminder about what current service level is. Of the $21.6 million we asked for, these are the major items. I think the key point here is that the biggest portion of our current service level is COLA and contractual increases for personnel. We are obviously a very human resource heavy institution, so that's the largest number. We also have requests for student aid and fringe benefits and utilities and insurance rates. Debt service actually is scheduled to go down. Women's lacrosse, which is a new sport to help us remain compliant with Title IX, which I know just had I think they just had their first A10 game this weekend. If I may be wrong about that, but they're up and running. And then we have some other miscellaneous line items. So grand total, $21.6 million for current service level. Next slide, please. So this is our strategic initiatives for FY26. They may look familiar to you because we essentially carried them over from our FY25 request. We had one strategic initiative per strategic priority in our strategic plan. So we asked for funding for life sciences faculty and remaining support for our land grant match. We are a land grant institution and we're supposed to have a state match. We asked for $5.3 million and we got zero in the governor's budget requests. We asked for it under strategic priority 2, enhance student achievement to support additional academic advisors, asked for $2 million and received zero. Number 3, for fostering an inclusive culture, asked for some support for the TD program and National Guard and tribal scholarship support, which we fund internally. Asked for $2.3 million, received zero. And then finally, strategic priority 4, powering the University of the Future to address some significant IT modernization needs. We asked for $4 million and received zero. So these carried over from last year. We also didn't receive funding from them last year, but we felt it was important to include them so that the state and the General Assembly is aware of really what our strategic priorities are.
And that was my question, Abby. These are all the same, right, compared to fiscal year 25 requests?
Yeah, the numbers changed a little bit because we did go through and we ended up trying to reallocate resources internally to fund some of these things. But generally they're mostly the same as what they were last year. Next slide. So RICAP, we do have some good news here. So I wanted to highlight 3 particular things in our RICAP request. Asset protection, as I think you know, is our kind of our bread and butter RICAP funding that we use to support repair and maintenance on our buildings. So we did ask, and again, I'm showing the evolution here for your reference for FY25. But in FY26, we asked for $16.8 million and we received $14.6 million. While it's not the full amount we requested, it is a $0.6 million increase from last year. So we're pleased about that. RICAP accessibility was actually a new line item on our capital improvement plan this year, which you may recall from our discussions with the board last summer. We decided to actually put a line item specifically for accessibility issues. We have lots of elevators that aren't functional, lots of buildings that aren't accessible, and sort of sidewalks and other parts of the campus that aren't accessible. We asked for $16.5 million over 5 years, and the governor's budget gave us $7 million. So we're really excited about that. While not the full amount, it's a new line item in RICAP that we can use specifically to address some of those longstanding accessibility issues. And then finally, academic, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. It's not a very exciting title, but this is to support doing the HVAC on 2 of our buildings, Whitehall and Fogarty. We have asked for this in the past and we've gotten funding to complete Whitehall. You'll notice between the FY25 enacted number and the FY26 request, there's an $8 million increase. And part of that is to address increasing construction costs since we actually initially priced out the Fogarty portion of this work. We did ask for $8 million to be able to complete Fogarty and we received the whole $8 million additional. So we're really pleased about that as well. And then the final slide just has a couple of bullets about other RICAP items. So the first bullet is what I just explained to you about Fogarty Hall. The second is just to let you know that our athletic complex renewal, our fine arts building, our academic fire protection, NBC phase 1 and phase 2 renewals, and stormwater management projects all came in as previously appropriated. So the RICAP appropriation comes out for the 5 years. So we're very pleased about that. We did ask for an additional $1.7 million in RICAP for our PFAS plant. So if you recall, we did get $20 million from the state for PFAS. And because of a bit of a challenge with the original budget 2 years ago that gave it to us in ARPA funds, and then they shifted it to RICAP funds and increasing costs of the overall project, we asked for $1.7 million in RICAP. We didn't get the extra $1.7 million in RICAP, but they did suggest that we could seek financing through the Emerging Contaminants Program at the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. So we will certainly be exploring that opportunity. And then finally, we also added some new line items to our SIP this year in an attempt to just really be very open and honest about the significant capital needs on our campus. So in addition to the new line item for accessibility, we added an item for Carruthers, our library HVAC system, campus access control. So that's access to all of our buildings, electronic access, and then building envelopes. So while asset protection is meant to address building envelopes, including windows and roofs, we actually have 15 actively leaking roofs currently, and we have such a significant need that we wanted to actually put a building envelopes line item on there for $53 million. We didn't receive any funding for those in the governor's budget, but again, we felt it important to include those on our capital improvement plan. So I believe that's the last slide. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
No questions? Thank you, Abby. Do you want to continue all the discussion items and then move on to the tuition? Because that's an action, correct?
Let's do tuition and fees right now. I think that was the amended agenda item.
Sure.
So I'm going to kick this off. I'm also going to ask my colleague, John Pullman, our AVP for Financial Strategy and Planning, to assist me with this. And we do have Dean Labuti here and Ellen Reynolds, who I'm so thankful for as partners if there are questions about housing or enrollment. So the goal of this presentation is to walk you through our recommendation for FY26 tuition and fees. So if you recall, I guess it's been 2 years now that we made a shift where we submit the governor's budget in September with certain assumptions around tuition and fees, but then we have shifted approval of tuition and fees to the board until February, which allows us to make a more informed decision once we get through the fall census and really get a better sense of what our peers are doing. So the goal today is to give you an overview of our recommendation for tuition and fee rates, and then to have an action to allow us to go ahead and publish those rates. Now, the action today would be to recommend to the board, and then the board would take this up at the February meeting. So if we can go to the first slide, please. So total cost of attendance. Just so you're aware, the board has responsibility for evaluating rates as they relate to a student's total cost of attendance and approving mandatory tuition and fees. So we define total cost of attendance, which is a higher ed, term of art, as tuition, mandatory fees, which are fees paid by all students, and then standard housing and dining charges, which we define the standard housing and dining charges as those most likely to be selected for a given student. So you can see here the details about what we include in the standard housing, a group B double, an unlimited standard plan, and also a housing specific communication fee. So on the next slide, this is a slide on mandatory fees, housing and dining. So this is just an update on our housing and dining rates that we're proposing for this year. As a reminder, housing and dining are auxiliary functions, so they must be self-supporting. So the charges that are given to students and proposed to be changed year over year essentially reflect the cost of doing business. So they're not treated the same way as tuition and mandatory fees, in that we're really just trying to make sure that we can keep up all of our dining and housing functions with the rates that we charge. So here you can see that overall, we're requesting or recommending a 3% increase to our housing and dining rates. So we're recommending a 2% increase to the standard housing rate and a 4.7 increase to dining. We continue to see dramatic increases in food prices. I'm sure a lot of you are seeing that on your own grocery bill, but that's why a significant increase in the dining rate for a total overall increase of 3%. Any questions on this? Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So these are our mandatory fees. Mandatory fees are fees paid by every student. So you see a list of them here. We're only asking for 2 increases for a total increase of all mandatory fees of 0.7%. The first is an increase for Fascitelli Fitness and Wellness, so a $6 increase from $110 to $116. As I'm sure Ellen can expand on, we see a tremendous amount of usage for this facility, and it requires a lot of equipment replacement, and a lot of work to keep it up and keep it as this wonderful facility for our students as it is. So that's why we're asking for the $6 increase. And then the second is a Memorial Union fee, which is a $10 increase. So the Memorial Union, as you may recall, we have a planned renovation that's been put on hold while we've been focusing on student housing. We are hopeful that we're going to be able to move forward with the MU once we have final decision on the P3 for housing. But in the meantime, it needs some much needed upgrades. So this fee would allow us to do some key upgrades to the Memorial Union to make it functional for our students while we await the larger, more complicated renovation and expansion. So again, the mandatory fees would be a total of 0.7% overall for all mandatory fees. Next slide.
Abby,
Yes.
why wouldn't we raise it more? Why are we under inflation? If you think inflation's 3 or we're looking at tuition of 3, why would we kind of be eating into these fees with not keeping pace with that or close to that?
So the key thing to remember about fees is that they are designated for a specific use. So we really try to make sure the fees are only, we have to make sure that they're only charged for what we anticipate actually needing for that specific use. Tuition is a much more flexible source of funding because we allocate it based on need related to cost of instruction and running the university. But again, the goal is to make sure the fees are really just addressing what we're going to need in the upcoming.
But the fees are mandatory, right? So there's no choice about.
That's correct. Tuition is mandatory as well.
I think that's a difference or a distinction. I mean, if we're raising less than 3% or less than some percent, but falling behind in terms of inflation, providing replacement or whatever. So we can choose to raise tuition. We're going to dent it now, but to have no increase in this, 0.7 seems to me to be,
So
you could argue where it should come, but.
I think an important thing to note is that we treat, as I mentioned earlier, we look at the total cost of attendance, right? So
Right.
Our families are looking, they're going to pay a bill and it's going to have tuition, fees, and housing and dining if they're on campus. So overall, the number to them is what we care about. It's what helps them with affordability. The way that gets distributed is really based on what are needed for the fees and then the overall cost of to the university for instruction, which is what's reflected in tuition. So I understand your point, and I think that could be part of the conversation about what we do with tuition. But for fees, we really try to restrict them to what the actual need will be, regardless of inflation or other broader factors. Okay, next slide. So here there's a lot of numbers here, but I want to just point out a couple of things. And we do have Dean here if there are more specific questions, but this is an evolution of our undergraduate full-time enrollment targets. It's been a complicated year or two in higher ed. So if you look on the upper table, that's our first year enrollment, and the bottom table is our transfer enrollment. So what you'll see here is an evolution in key points of time. So the first column is FY25, our budget allocation. So this is what we, essentially what our budget was last year and what we were targeting for our first year undergraduate full-time enrollment target. If you look at the second column, that's our actual enrollment. So that was our census date. So October 15th is our census date. We take a look at what students are actually enrolled, and that gives us kind of real data to compare to what our budget is. And then the third column is the difference between the budget and the actuals from October 15th. So the key takeaways, which I know we've talked about at the board before, is that while we were up in-state students by 62, we were significantly down in out-of-state students by 308 students, which is a significant loss of enrollment for us. And I think there are a lot of factors that we can talk about later when we talk about our proprietary enrollment strategies. But that's less than we were anticipating. So if you look at FY26 budget request, we had to submit that in September. So we submit that before the October 15th census. So I think we're conservative in what we put in FY26, hoping that the multitude of factors that could have resulted in our loss of out-of-state students. One of the big ones was the fast food debacle, which I know we talked about as a board, that impacted schools all over the country. So we're hopeful that that was a large part of the reason we didn't meet that enrollment target. So we were planning to kind of keep it back to our normal run rate. And that's what we put in for the September board meeting, or the September budget that we submitted to the state before we got to census. And then after census, we took a look at where we were taking a look at our peers, doing our best guess and estimating. And we actually decided to increase our target enrollments by 25 for in-state and 10 for out-of-state. So that kind of gets us to where we are and what we're planning for in our budget for FY26, which is an overall increase of 35 students. So I wanted to show you that evolution because it's a complicated process, and it really depends on sort of the dates that we have to submit the budget and the dates that we get actual enrollment. And again, we'll talk more about that later when Dean Labuti presents. And then it's a similar story for transfers. I think our transfer numbers, it's a very positive story. You'll see we had that plus 68 for in-state transfers and also plus on the regional side. So we're looking forward to having additional transfers, planning for plus 35 in FY26.
Just a quick question. I know we'll go into depth around enrollment, but I think it's important for the public to understand too. Is that loss out of state, is that comparable against organization or various peers? Is that lower, just high level?
So I think there are a lot of factors. I'd love Dean to jump in here. There have been studies that have shown a 5 to 10% increase overall or decrease overall across the country due to FAFSA. But I don't think FAFSA alone is the only aspect. But we have seen, most of our peers have seen some sort of decrease last year. And Dean, I'm happy to open it up to you if you want to share anything.
Yeah, Courtney recently attended a conference with all of my peers, especially New England and the Mid-Atlantic, and there are some common threads that last year was a challenging year. One, because of FAFSA, but also because of declining demographics.
Within New England area particularly?
Within the New England and Mid-Atlantic, that is correct, yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, again, this is another busy slide, but you may recall it. It's the slide that we included in our governor's budget. In our budget submission presentation back in September. This is just an overall summary of our undergraduate enrollment for fall, our FY25 budget, our 26 request and adjusted, and then our graduate enrollment. And then the table at the bottom is our tuition rates. So I mentioned earlier that when we submit our budget to the state in September, it includes assumptions. So we assumed a 3% tuition increase for our state budget submission purposes. And as you'll see later in this presentation, we are actually recommending a different tuition increase. But this is essentially what our assumptions were in the September budget submission. Next slide, please. Okay, tuition recommendations and items for consideration. So our recommendation is to approve, for the board to approve, or the Finance and Facilities Committee to recommend to the board, a 3.5% tuition increase for in-state and 3.5% tuition increase for out-of-state students. Based on our model assumptions, this level of increase optimizes our resources to make sure that we can continue these critical operations while keeping our education accessible and limiting potential enrollment declines. And as we have mentioned regularly, we need to make sure that we're considering when we think about tuition increases, how they may play relative to our strategic plan and our KPIs around student success and inclusion. The last bullet just highlights what we spoke about recently, which is that we really have seen unprecedented market conditions post-COVID with the FAFSA impacts, a lot of in-state tuition programs in our neighboring states where a lot of our regional students come from, and also generally an inflationary environment. So we have amazing financial aid enrollment management professionals that put a lot of thought into how we plan for enrollment and forecast, but there is some volatility to be expected as we saw last year. Next slide, please. So the assumptions that we use in this forecasting are similar to what we shared last year, which is that once tuition reaches a 4% increase year over year, our enrollment could decrease anywhere from 1% to 2%. Again, this is an internal assumption that we use in our planning. We apply the decline assumptions to all of our student types, but based on different factors for in-state and out-of-state students. Tuition and fee percentage increases are the same across all student types, but the dollar amount impacts differ based on those tuition and fees. So it's important to keep in mind, and you'll see this when John walks through the financial impacts. So in-state students have a different dollar amount impact in their pocket than our out-of-states based on the total tuition and fees that they pay. This is just a data point for every 0.5% of enrollment loss. It equates to about $1.1 million lost in tuition net of financial aid. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John Pullman, who's going to talk a little bit about our peers and comparisons, and then talk through what we think the financial impacts would be of this 3.5% across the board increase. John?
Great, thanks, Abby. So the line graph that's presented here reflects total cost of attendance amounts for URI compared to our New England peers over the time horizon of fiscal year 2020 through fiscal year 2025. As a reminder, these FY 2025 amounts reflect each institution's sticker price, meaning that discounting or financial aid packages are not captured here. While our in-state sticker price remains less than our peers, financial aid offered, commonly referred to as an institution's discount rate, needs to be factored in to determine what a family truly pays. Unfortunately, this information is considered proprietary and is very difficult to obtain for our peers. Next slide, please. So this slide demonstrates various in-state tuition increase scenarios and how these proposed increases would translate to newly proposed rates that would take effect in fall 2025 and how those rates compare to today's rates. As a reminder, the full-time enrollment assumed row at the top of the slide represents the total number of in-state full-time undergraduates assumed for fall 2025, which has been informed by our fall 2024 actual enrollments. As Abby mentioned previously, we assume that enrollment losses begin at the 4% tuition increase scenario. Next slide, please. So we've reproduced the same slide that we just walked you through, but this time for our out-of-state undergraduate population. As you can see, URI's FY25 out-of-state total cost of attendance sticker price remains competitive compared to those of our New England peers. Next slide, please. As a reminder, mandatory fees and room and board charges are applied consistently to both in-state and out-of-state populations. As you can see here, a 3.5% tuition increase would result in a tuition increase of $1,236 year over year for an out-of-state family, resulting in a total cost of attendance increase of $1,684 year over year. Next slide, please. As mentioned to the subcommittee last year, URI views expansion of our graduate enrollment offerings as a significant area of opportunity for the institution and is reflected in our ambitious institutional KPIs related to growth in our graduate enrollments. To help make progress towards reaching those targets, several initiatives are underway. First, we are beginning the process of establishing annual graduate enrollment targets, both at the college and total university levels, as part of our larger budget model implementation efforts. This has resulted in more explicit conversations related to both challenges and potentially untapped strategies or markets, resulting in a clearer pathway for how we can incrementally work towards these targets. As a reminder, university leadership reviewed proposals as part of a pilot strategic investment initiative in the summer of 2023, in which university fund balance served as seed funding to help eliminate barriers related to standing up new programs. Proposals funded through the strategic investment initiative process are on track to generate resources in perpetuity for URI. As part of our incentive-based budget model development efforts, we look to replicate a similar funding mechanism to ensure new, innovative programs can continue to be launched while associated enrollments and net tuition ramps up over time. Finally, the university is actively evaluating our current graduate tuition rates to see if transitioning to a market-driven approach to setting these tuition rates would better position us in the market. This will allow the university increased flexibility in tailoring rates based on market conditions, which is more closely aligned with higher education leading practices. Next slide, please. And so I believe this is our final slide for you today. So this summarizes how all the slides we've walked you through come together in the form of incremental tuition net of financial aid generated compared to FY25 budgeted levels. As you can see here, the proposed 3.5% tuition increase scenario generates the most net tuition based on the assumptions that have been outlined. Slides have been included in the appendix for additional reference that outline what these scenarios would look like with the enrollment loss assumption removed, consistent with what had been requested by this subcommittee in prior years. So with that, that concludes our presentation, and Abby and I welcome any questions members of the board may have at this time.
And I'll just remind that we do have a proprietary enrollment strategy conversation in executive session, and then there is an action item after executive session to approve our recommendations. So look forward to any questions you might have.
I don't have any questions. Any other members of the board, committee questions? Great, thank you very much. Next item, Abby, please.
Okay, so the next item is an update on a revocable easement agreement with a budding neighbor at the W. Alton Jones campus. So as a reminder, for those that may recall, we did discover several years ago an accidental driveway and storage building encroachment on the Alton Jones campus by a family named Santilli. We have worked with the Santilli family and agreed to sign a revocable easement agreement, essentially an easement allowing them to continue access through their driveway, but that we could revoke if needed for future actions at the Alton Jones campus. The board approved this recommendation for this revocable easement in April of 2024, and we had to go to State Properties Committee to get that approved, which is a required step in our kind of regulatory framework. So when we went to the State Properties Committee, the Department of Environmental Management reviewed the revocable easement, and they also reviewed the encroachment, and they found that it impacted wetlands, and so they wanted a memorandum of agreement between URI and the Santilli family and DEM to outline a restoration plan for the time if and when we decided to revoke the easement. This requirement prompted the Santilli family on October 28th to formally withdraw their intent to execute an agreement on the revocable easement. On December 3rd of 2024, we acknowledged the formal withdrawal by the Santilli family and reserved any and all rights regarding the encroachment and the ability to take whatever actions may be necessary to protect our proprietary interests should we so choose. So essentially, because we weren't able to reach agreement with the family and we don't have any immediate plans that would require us to impact their access, we are just making sure that we're not entering into an agreement with them, but it is acknowledged very clearly that we have the ability to revoke our access and address the encroachment if and so we choose. So So this is just an update to the board for further information on an action you already approved.
Abby, do we know, I mean, you must know, like, what motivated them to withdraw? Was it just going to be too burdensome to agree to what DEM's asking for?
I think that was part of it, that it would be burdensome. They're also, they have in the past implied, although we do not agree, that they had this encroachment before we even received the property, and we have evidence that that is not true. So it hasn't been a very friendly negotiation over the years, and I think this was sort of one more step. That the DEM saying we had to enter into an MOU is something that they are interested in doing. And again, we don't have any immediate plans, but we want to make sure, and I really appreciate the support of our Office of General Counsel, that it's very clear that they are encroaching on our property. And if and when we decide that we need to do something to impact that encroachment, we have the right to do so. But we don't right now. So in terms of being good neighbors, we're not going to push it any further at this time.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, should I go on to the next item?
Please do.
Okay.
Excuse me, real quick, not to interrupt, but Abby, I think we have two
You
B.
skipped B, yeah, Ryback.
Oh, did I?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
Oh, I'm
skip Ryback.
sorry, I did. My fault. Thank you for letting me know.
No
I
worries.
can go back to 2B, which is review of URI exhibit to Ryback, annual report to bondholders. So this is on our annual calendar for Finance and Facilities Committee in January. Essentially, URI is required to have an official statement for each bond offering that we may issue through Ryback. As part of that official statement, we're required to provide information relating to the University of Rhode Island, governance, leadership, strategic plan, facts and figures. We update this annually for the board for a couple of reasons. One, so that if we do decide to issue a bond, which we don't have any plans in the immediate future to issue a bond, but we want to make sure that the board sees it once a year. But also, it's really a great reference document for the board. So I encourage all of you, if you have the time, to read it, because it gives a very high-level updated summary of the university's governance, university's strategic priorities, facts and figures. So it's really provided to you as an informational item. If and when we do issue a bond, a revenue bond that we issue, not a GO bond, we would update this to make sure it's the most up to date. But again, we don't have any plans in the immediate future to do that. Any questions on this? Okay, thank you for letting me know. I skipped an item, so I think we're back to 2D, which is approvals under the delegation of authority to the president relating to land and property. So this is I do this every meeting just to let you know that in between meetings, often the president will execute something that he is delegated to do from the board, and we just have a requirement to report on it. So I just have one item, as you see in the attachment, which is continued agreement with East Stroudsburg University of Pennsylvania and URI to allow for research that's funded by the USDA. It's a business accelerator license agreement executed by myself on behalf of President Parlange, and it was approved by the State Properties Committee on December 10th. So again, this is allowing us to further a research project funded by the USDA. Any questions on that?
Well, next item, please.
Okay, so I think the next item is a report of action taken in executive session. So you may recall that before the end of last year, we spoke to the Finance and Facilities Committee and gave them an update that we were working on negotiating an enterprise resource planning software contract with Workday. We also got approval from the board at the November meeting to continue negotiations with Workday and enter into a contract. And this is my official reporting that we did, in fact, enter into a contract in December with Workday. It's a 10-year contract, and it is, we're very excited about it. We're at the beginning of a long process to implement Workday, but as some of you may know, the state is implementing Workday, and the ability to be on the same system as the state. They're also trying to modernize their ERP, and we're going to modernize ours on the same system is advantageous for many reasons. So This is just a final report that we did in fact execute that contract, and planning is underway for implementation. Any questions? Okay.
All right, so the next item on the agenda is executive session. At this point, may I have a motion that the committee convene into the executive session pursuant to Rhode Island General Law 42-46-5A7 for discussion regarding a matter related to the question of the investment of public funds, which includes any investment plan or matter related thereto where the premature disclosure would adversely affect the public interest, specifically proprietary enrollment model discussion.
This is Courtney, so moved.
Second, Vice President.
Any discussions on the motion? There being no discussion, may I have a voice vote? All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously, and we now convene into executive session for the reasons specified. It is anticipated the executive session will last approximately 20 minutes, after which the committee will reconvene into open session. The live stream will be paused during the executive session and will resume once the executive session has ended, and the committee reconvenes into open session. For all those participating via WebEx, please confirm by saying yes that no other person is present or able to hear the discussion at the remote location. If you do not automatically move into the breakout session, join the session when prompted on your computer screen by clicking on the Join Now button. Attendees not participating in the executive session will be moved to the waiting area.
Yes.
So we need to say
Yes.
yes. Yes.
when we return. Okay, we're all back in open session and we're live.
Okay, the committee is now convening an open session. The first order of business in open session is a motion to seal the executive session minutes. May I have a motion?
So moved. This is Almond.
Courtney, second.
So any discussions on a motion? There being no discussion, I ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is item number 4, action items. And the first action item is a recommendation for approval of tuition and fees related to FY 2026 and a recommendation to URI Board of Trustees. Abby, we don't need to add anything more, right? We discussed this. We can just go take a vote, right? Since we already discussed this in the open session prior to executive session, may I have a motion that the committee recommend that the board approve a tuition increase of 3.5% for in-state students and 3.5% for out-of-state students and increase fee rates as presented in the enclosure, representing a 0.7% increase in total fees.
This is Almond. So moved.
May I have a second?
Second, Mike Fascitelli.
Thank you. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is passing unanimously, is approved. Next item is recommendation for approval contracts in excess of $5 million and recommendation to the URI Board of Trustees for First Transit and Katie Blair and Associates. Abby?
Great, thank you. So we're seeking approval for 2 contracts in excess of $5 million as required under the policy on approval and execution of contracts and other binding documents. The first is a change order to a contract with First Transit, which is the company that provides our campus shuttle services. The current contract expires at the end of June 2025, and we're seeking to exercise a renewal option and extend the contract for 2 years. So the previously board approved amount for First Transit was $9.6 million. The new contract control value would be $13.2 million. So this is really just exercising a renewal of the option in the original contract. And then the second is to execute a change order for a contract with a marketing firm called Katie Shilborn Associates, KSA, that would extend the contract for an additional 5 months and increase the total obligation by an estimated $500,000. The board previously approved this contract at $8.52 million. Since that time, we did increase the purchase order to the purchase order value to $10.22 million, and that was within the 20% approval. If you recall, the board has allowed us to increase previously approved amount by 20%. The new contract value would be $10.72 million. And important to note on this is we've actually been in a pretty lengthy procurement process to do an RFP for a new marketing contract. So we're in that process right now. We anticipate it will be finishing up in the next few months, but we need to make sure we maintain this current contract in place, which is why we're trying to extend and seek approval for this at this time.
Abby, what was the first contract renewal increase? I didn't understand that.
So First Transit, so that's they do our campus shuttles. So the previously board approved contract amount was $9.6 million, and we're seeking to extend it to $13.2 million, which would give us 2 more years of service on the contract.
But is that an increase of $3 million change a year?
So the total increase is of course, I don't have that math right here, but it's 2.8 million. So that's for 2 years, over the course of 2 years.
Doesn't that seem high? I mean, we just talked about inflation. Doesn't that seem like that seems like a very high increase for renewal? It just seems like that's
it's the terms that were
that's more than our increase in tuition.
We've actually already increased this contract once, so it's the original renewal terms that were in the original contract.
That doesn't make me feel any better that we increased it before that.
How much the original contract was for how much for how many years?
I have Tracy Angel here, so I'm going to hold of Tracy, 'cause she might have that detail.
I remember this from the last week. This thing's going up a lot. I think it's like
We
5
added
million.
to it last year. You're correct, Mark. Yeah, Mike, sorry.
We did, thank you. I'm just pulling that up right now so I can see what the average has been for our annual usage, which I think is what you're really looking for right now, right?
Yes, looking for the increase year over year.
While she's pulling it up, we actually have increased our shuttle usage on campus. So we've increased safe rides, we've increased the frequency of shuttle usage. So I would not be surprised to see an increase in the annual rate, but let's see what those actual numbers are for Tracy.
So we've been averaging about 1.5 million per year over the past, and this does go back to 2019.
So what's the 13 million? I'm just so confused by these numbers and.
So at one point, we did also have two contracts. We had the Providence shuttle contract, and then we also had the Kingston shuttle contract. So the original was broken into two parts. We did reduce those down to one and combine them. So it is now just the Kingston campus, but we did have shuttles running in multiple locations at one time. So that probably elevated the overall cost.
So the initial contract, Tracy, was for how many years for how much? It started in 2019. How many years were the initial contract for, and how much was the value of the contract?
The initial contract. And again, there were two, which is what I'm going to be missing a little piece.
Were they
of.
both with First Transit, two contracts with them?
Yes.
And then during COVID, obviously they at some point didn't do much, right?
Yes, it did. Well, it decreased a bit. Yes, in 2020 we were down to about 800,000 on the Kingston campus versus the 1.5 million. So we did still have services here. Obviously, we still had students here to some degree, but it did decrease during that year. The original contract. Oops.
So the last time this went out as an RFP was 2019.
Correct. And then it will go out to RFP after this final renewal.
Have you proposed you want to renew this for 2 years or 1 year? Well, I still don't understand exactly what we're doing.
So in the original contract, there were an option for two separate renewals. We've already renewed it one time, which is a standard practice if we're comfortable with the vendor and they're providing good renewal extensions. So we've already renewed it once. This will be the second, and it would be a 2-year renewal, and we would go out for RFP at that time for a new transit shuttle provider. Does that help?
Well, just what was it? What was for this renewal? It was X dollars. How much is it going to renew? Just simple. We only went to one contract now, right? Province is gone. So what's the apples increase?
So I'm happy to follow up with the exact amount and give you the information about the consolidation of contracts, and then we can defer this to the full board if that's an option, so I can make sure that everyone's comfortable. We'll give you the breakdown over the course of the contract from the time it was initially signed to what we're proposing now. Does that sound like a good path forward?
Yeah, it does. And if you could, sorry, go ahead, Armin.
But is it based on a per ride or an estimated value of a per ride yearly, and then there's a credit and a debit?
It's estimated based on usage in addition to fuel consumption and reimbursement.
So there's an hourly rate and then there's fuel consumption reimbursements. That's how the contract. So it's time and usage.
So we're projecting 1.7 million for the upcoming fiscal year. It's a 2-year renewal, 1.7 million for the upcoming year, and then for fiscal year 27, a $1.8 million increase, which these are estimates because again, it is a time and material contract.
but we
So-
can, this isn't until June, so we do have time to give additional information.
So going back to your initial comment about how we had the two contracts during COVID, one of them wasn't which was the Providence one, I think you mentioned. We didn't really use it, and it went down to like 800,000. And now we still don't do Providence with them, so it's just one contract. We're talking for 1 year, 1.7 million. So personally, I and I'll refer to other people to ask their questions. I like the idea of Abby to kind of deferring this. If you could send the committee some more information.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I would like to see the information. I'd like to see the date of the initial contract, right? And I think you mentioned, I don't need to see the contract, but you mentioned it had 2 renewal windows in there. And how much was it for? I think another question that Armin asked, and I don't think I still understood what the answer was. So is this like a flat lump sum contract? They get $1.5 million a year. It can go up, but
No,
it can't go down.
So the
No, that's the
purchase
question I
order,
have. Can it go down as well as up?
it's based on time and usage. So it's an hourly rate for usage, and it's based on fuel consumption. So our estimates are based on use, and that we adjust use based on the need of our students. So we do our best forecasting of how much we're going to use of the shuttle time. So it's a kind of a ceiling estimate.
So
we'll
have
only
they
go
ever
up.
been below their, other than COVID, have they ever been below their estimate?
I don't know the answer to that right now, but I'm certainly happy to.
Those are a couple of things, right? I think at the end of the day, I think the questions I'm hearing, we're not sure. The numbers seem 1.7 per year for 2 years. It seems kind of high, as just like Mike was said initially, right? And also it'd be good to know who decides with I assume we have someone who decides within the university community how often the shuttle should run. And
Yeah.
It's not decided by the vendor, right?
That falls under me. So that's under our transportation and parking office, which is under public safety. So it's based on kind of continual usage of our parking lots, understanding how our parking lots are full or not. So as you know, a lot of our students park down in the Plains Road parking lots. So it's based on usage to get students up to campus. We've increased their usage for Safe Ride pretty dramatically over the last year, where we have more options for sort of on-demand transportation for our students at night, or if they need to go somewhere off campus. And that's been really based on an assessment of student need. And we try to do that as often as possible. So they've been a good partner, but certainly we want to make sure that when the final renewal option is exercised, that we go out to RFP and reevaluate what our options are. But I'm happy to get the committee more information on this particular contract. That's no problem.
Mike and Armin, are you good with that? Because nobody
Yeah,
else has
no, I'm
asked.
good.
Yeah,
I'm good. Yeah.
I'm fine.
Any other questions on this? So we're going to shelve the first transit until the board meeting, and we're just going to vote on the Katie Shibler one, which you did answer what question I was going to ask. What are we going to do an RFP? We are going to do an RFP. So
Yeah, we're in the process.
any other questions? Then may I have a motion that the committee recommend that the board approve the purchase of services from Katie Shibler and Associates as presented on the substantially the terms in the enclosed document, and that any authorized signatory as defined in the policy and approval and execution of contracts and other binding documents be authorized to negotiate the terms of any documents relating to such transaction on a substantially the terms in the enclosed documents, with any such changes and additional terms as are deemed necessary or appropriate by the authorized signatory. God, I had to come up for air on that one. I'm getting old.
Yeah.
So
So, so moved.
may I have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Opposed? Abstentions? Yeah, the motion passes unanimously. And the next item in the agenda is adjournment. May I? Now, there's going to be a race for motions on this one. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So move. This is Courtney.
Second, Mike.
There you go. And may I have a voice vote? All in favor, please say yes.
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 Yes. And opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes unanimously. The next meeting of the Finance and Facilities Committee is scheduled for April 17th, 2025. I'd like to thank Abby, Dean, and everybody else who participated. Really good information for us. So excellent meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.